Hello there friends, I'm April San Pedro and I have another video for you. If you're new here, thank you so much for spending the time to watch my video. I hope my videos will serve as an inspiration or at least you pick up something from it. In my channel, you'll find various videos like how I make my stationery, and I also love sharing things about journaling and some techniques. And just like in this video, I would like to share another technique for your journaling. July is a watercolor month, and I've thought of sharing some tips and tricks that mix watercolor and journaling together. Now, one of my favorite medium or art material is watercolor. I've been using it for years now. Although it's true that watercolor is actually the first art material that is been taught probably when you were still young, because it's very safe, it's very versatile. But at the same time, it's also one of the hardest medium. That's because it takes a lot of patience for you to layer one paint to the other. Now, my videos are mostly not about watercolor tutorials, but I would like to incorporate watercolor for your journaling as well, because even if you're a beginner, you can use a lot of medium on your journals just to add more textures or more layers and just add more colors to your journal, and hoping it will be an inspiration for you just to keep on writing, or it will spark your creativity by just seeing colors already on your journal pages. Now, July is actually a watercolor month, so I will share videos that is watercolor related for the entire month of July. I want to share with you a watercolor technique that you can use for your backgrounds on your journals. Now, you don't need to have skills, or if this is your first time to use watercolor, it's perfectly fine. It might actually inspire you to get a watercolor if this is the first time you're gonna do it. Or if you have kids, it's gonna be a fun activity as well. So I'm gonna share a watercolor wash. Just basically paint or wash your background with watercolor. So there's no need for form or perfect subjects because we're just playing with colors. Now, before we do that, I want to share with you first some of the pages that I use watercolor wash on my journals. So as you can see here, I just actually paint two colors on both pages. So you don't have to paint the entire page, but if you feel like doing so, you can do that. But in this page, I was just trying to create an accent with pastel colors, and that's what I'm gonna share with you later, how to do this, which is very, very easy. So here, I did two colors as well, but instead of doing it on the edges, I did it in the middle part. And then here's another one. Now here's a scattered one. So I did on the edges, in the middle, and then I believe I already wrote something here and I just decided to add colors. So this one doesn't have any colors, but on the bottom part I had colors or watercolor in it. And then here it's a bit darker, just at the top of the page. So as you can see, so many possibilities. You can create different colors, or you can combine different colors. Like here's a combination of two colors with other medium that I use. Now, I've used a lot of medium here like watercolor and colored pencil, but in this video I just want to share a watercolor technique so you won't get overwhelmed. And once you're done with one technique, you do another technique, which I'll be sharing with you as well on my next few videos. So here, this is also a watercolor wash, but instead of just washing the watercolor, I made a different brush strokes here. That's why you can see different stroke instead of like this. So many possibilities. In this journal, you'll see the same thing. I added the watercolor wash as my background using two colors. Now you can use one or two colors, or if you feel like adding more, that would be great. But I like limiting my colors to just one or two, just not to overwhelm myself with so much colors. But that will actually depend on your mood. Like if you feel like adding colors more than two, then that definitely okay. So here, that's another two colors, one a little bit dark red, and then going here is just yellow. Now this one is just on this side, while on the other page is more of like ephemeras. So many possibilities. You can paint your entire spread with watercolor, or you can just make an accent. So just like this one. Here is definitely just an accent because I just put it at the middle. And this one, I just use the tip of the brush just so to create a different watercolor brush stroke. Now it's pretty much the same with all the pages. It's just sometimes I use different colors, sometimes I use the same. So it depends on the mood. I'm quite impatient, so that's why you'll see sometimes it's only an accent instead of the entire page. So here I have a different paper that I also did a watercolor wash, and then I just stapled it on the page. And see, I just love using watercolor. You don't need to do so much with your spread. If you don't have ephemeras, washi tapes, or stamps, the watercolor will just create a very good background for your journal, and you're done. That's it. So here's another one. This one I use gesso, which I'd probably share next time, but for usual journaling, especially when you're a beginner or you're journaling outside, we don't need gesso anymore. I just tried it here, so I think that's just an extra layer for your journal, but yeah, not necessarily. Have one here which I wash the entire page. Now if you want to watercolor wash your entire journal, it will take a lot of patience before it will get dry. So you need to do this prior to your journaling, but I'll teach you also a quick technique if you wanted to do this for the entire page and you already wanted to journal. Here's another one that I did with 3 colors. So sometimes I choose my colors based on the ephemeras I'm using. So here I know I have more than 2 colors, so I just follow the colors that I have here and I just use that for the background or for the watercolor background. Then for the last one, so as you can see, it's pretty much the same, but I just love how it looks on my journal. So here on this side, I just used one color in the entire page. And then here, it's the same thing. I just put wash on this side of the page. So now that we have an idea what watercolor wash will look like on your journals, let's get into it. Now all you need to have is watercolor, a watercolor brush, a water pot, and whatever journals that you will be using for your journaling. So in my case, I've been using watercolor for quite some time now. I'm also a part of a watercolor group, and I've been joining exhibitions. So I'm already using an artist grade watercolor, and Daniel Smith is really my favorite watercolor set. So what I have here is a Daniel Smith watercolor set. What I have here is a Daniel Smith watercolor, which I custom the palettes already. As far as I know, when you buy this kind of palette, it only has 6 colors with it, and then you can just fill in the others with the watercolor tube. Now that is if you already have, or if you want to get into the watercolor world. But if you're new to this, just go to your usual school supply store and just grab whatever watercolor they have, because it doesn't matter whether you're using a student grade, an artist grade, or just for kids, because this is just merely for fun. It doesn't need to be very expensive. Yeah, you just grab whatever watercolor materials that you have. Okay, so now that we have the basic materials that we will be needing, here's an option that I have. So I have here a heat gun. So if you're a crafter, you love crafting, scrapbooking, I'm pretty sure you have a heat gun. I think you can also use a hair dryer, but I haven't tried it yet. But the heat gun though has more power, so it dries quickly compared to a hair dryer. But this is just an optional in case you want to dry your page quickly than the usual drying time, but technically you don't really need this. It's just that if you're quite impatient with your watercolor page and you want to write on it already, I suggest you prep your pages first. Okay, so let's try it now. I'm using Artisan Paperie Pandagdag journal. So this is one of my products. The paper can handle so much watercolor, and other mediums. So if you're from the Philippines, unfortunately, I'm not able to send this outside the Philippines yet, but I'm hoping this year I can work on it. But for now, what I can show you is like it can really handle a lot of watercolor wash. So just like this one, this is also an Artisan Paperie Pandagdag journal. So this one is number 402, while this one is 404. So I already have different versions of my refill. So this one is the basic, and this one is from one of my anniversary kit. So I will be using this. It's like I mentioned a while ago, if you don't have a heat gun, a hair dryer, and you just wanna keep on journaling, you're already inspired and all, you can just air dry your watercolor. But if you wanna keep going, I suggest you prep your pages already. So just like this one, I already prepped my paper. So I already did the wash and then let it dry, and then whenever I feel like journaling, then I can just journal on it right away. So let's do this. It's so simple and it's so fun that you can just have fun with it. This is also a great way to spark your creativity because you don't have to think, you don't have to have a reference, a photo reference. All you have to do is just choose a color. Now, if you're having a hard time combining colors, just look around you. Let's just say you have a plant in your house, then you can look into the plant and just check the colors they have. So plants have green, yellows, and browns, and that's already a palette for you. If you don't have those, just look outside, or if not, just play around. This is a free form watercolor wash, so you don't have to do it the right way with the color mixing and all. For the watercolor brush, I would suggest a big one, a thicker one, because we want to cover the page or wash the page quickly. But if you don't have a big one, a small one or even a smaller brush than this will also do the trick, but it will take you some time. So I would suggest get a bigger brush, or if you have a flat brush, that would also work fine. But eventually, if you get to know watercolor wash, try using different brushes from the shape and from the sizes, and you would find out that there are different ways on using it, and it will have a different effect on your page as well. So all we have to do is just get a watercolor and choose whatever color you want. Now the trick here is add a lot of water, because if you don't, then what will happen is it's gonna create dark background. But if that's what you're going for, that's fine. Also remember that when watercolor dries, it gets lighter. So if you're aiming for a dark watercolor background, then you have to add more paints or add another layer after. But if you're fine with a lighter background, then just leave it as it is. The challenge though, if you put too much water, it's gonna dry longer than usual. But if you're not in a hurry, that would be fine. Now what I also like doing is I already like mixing my colors together on my palette. So I'm mixing yellow and red to create a little bit of like a coral. You can also do that here. So as you can see, what I'm just doing is I'm just brushing the watercolor on my page, and that's just it. That's it. And as you can see, this is already, well, at least to me, it's already fun. I really love the look of the page after. Just gives so much color. So this is when you want to color the entire page or just leave some small spaces. So that's up to you. As you can see, I added a lot of water on the page, and it's really gonna make your paper warp. But to me, I really like the idea of warping paper on my journal. It adds personal touch to it. As you can see, the paper is so wet. If you're eager to journal, now this is not possible to work on it because your pen won't work if the paper is still wet. If you're gonna add ephemeras, it's not gonna stick so well. For faster drying time, like I said, we can use a heat gun with you. Just after this, you can already work on your journal page. Another advice when you're using a heat gun, try not to point the heat gun too close on your paper. And if in case you're using this for memory keeping, like you have photos at the back of the page, make sure to check on it every now and then because sometimes the heat will affect your photo and the glue as well. So if that's the case, just let the paint dry on its own instead of using a heat gun. Now, heat gun can actually make your paper warp more than just letting it dry on its own. So if you don't like the warping, you can just use tissue and then just wipe the excess water on your page. This will make the drying faster because you're getting the water out of the paper. But if you're looking for that darker color, then try to just let it dry on its own. So this is what it looks like when it's already dried. Watercolor will actually dry lighter. So if you're happy with this, that's fine. But if you want a darker color, just like this one, you might add more color with your watercolor wash or mixed here, or you can add another layer when it's already dry. Okay, so I want to try a different paper. This one, I'm using a Midori One Day One Page. What I'm doing here is I'm just prepping my page, so just in case I want to journal the next time, then I already have a background on my paper. So another option that you can use with your watercolor is a watercolor brush. If you like traveling with watercolor brush, or if you're outside journaling, this will also do the trick. I'm just brushing it with water, but you don't have to because I'm just trying to clean the brush. I'm gonna use this one. So I'm trying a different technique here. Instead of mixing my colors on my palette, I'm just gonna dab my paint directly and then just go straight to my paper. Add more water. So as you can see, if you don't put too much water, it's gonna give you a different effect, like more of like a dry brush. If that's what you're trying to do, then that's fine. But I really like the idea of like it's being washed or being stained. The challenge on using a water brush, since it has a very thin brush, it's gonna take a little while for you to finish or add colors to your page. So just like this one, and it's actually gonna give you a different stroke. So you can see here, it just looks like a wash. Here, I'm having a hard time with the stroke because it still shows a brush strokes here, so I'm just gonna let it be. And you can see here there's a dry stroke, but that's fine as well. I don't really mind having different strokes. Now I'm gonna use a different color but closer to this one, and I'm just squeezing my water brush to add more water. So as you can see, the difference on using a watercolor brush and a thicker one is quite different. A thicker brush will actually do the trick quicker than this, but if you're not in a rush and this is the only one you have, then that's okay. And I want to do here. And also, if you noticed, I didn't use the palette to mix my color and the water. It's darker compared to this. The more water you add, the more it will look like wash on your background. So I'm just gonna leave it as it is. So since this one has lesser water compared to this, it's darker. It dries quickly compared to the other one. Okay, so the next paper that I want to try this on is a planner. This one is also from my own brand. It's Artisan Paperie Blanco Planner. It's undated, and I want to try doing a watercolor wash on my spread. So I haven't tried doing this on my planner yet, but I'm using the same paper with this and the journal refill, so I'm pretty sure this can handle the watercolor as well. I'm gonna use the bigger watercolor brush. This is from Alvaro Castanet NIF in 0 size. It's a mop brush. So I love using this if I'm using a bigger watercolor paper. Okay, so I want to use green. Here. If you're using a bigger brush, you can just add more color on top of it and they will mix together. If you notice, I put so much water here and it's gonna warp at the back, or this page will actually warp, but I just love that look and that feeling and that sound. And I want to add here as well. Oh, I just love that. I'm gonna add more yellow here. Alright, I'm just gonna leave it as it is. So here are the 3 journals and planner that we tried the watercolor wash technique on. So as you can see, there are differences except for these 2. So here I used a thick brush and then I mixed the color on my palette so it has more water than paint. So as you can see, it's lighter. Here I use a water brush, and if you notice the brush strokes when it's dry, the paint is thicker compared to this one. And here I use a thicker brush, but I add the paint on the paper instead on the palette. So if you want to compare this will dry darker compared to this because we add more paint here. If you want to use this technique as your background for your journaling, I would definitely suggest to do the watercolor wash first before you write on it, rather than writing on the journal first and then you decide to put a watercolor wash. That will be fine as well, but sometimes if you already use pen or ink on your journal page and then you add the watercolor, there's probably a tendency that the ink of your pen will smudge, or if not, it will get a little bit blurry. So that will depend on your ink, but we don't want to risk that one because you have to write again. It's like, as you can see from my journal pages before, I did the watercolor wash before creating any decoration or writing on it. So here I did the watercolor wash first before I did the stamping, and then I add some pens and colored pencil and the ephemeras. For the writing, I did the watercolor wash first before I did the writing, just so to protect or not to write again, if you know what I mean. Okay, so let me know in the comments which one is your favorite among all the 3 tests that we did. Personally, I like this one because it just serves like a background. It doesn't distract you from writing, or if you want to add more ephemeras or anything like a photo, it's just like a colored background. I'm not quite a fan of seeing the brush strokes, so this is fine if you're just playing with it, but to me personally, I really don't like the look of it, but it doesn't really matter. And as you can see, the Midori paper also can handle it. If you're using a Hobonichi, of course, Tomoe River is one of the best papers that you can use watercolor. If you're not sure with the paper you're using, you can test it out first. Once you've seen how the paper behaves, then just have fun and play with it. Okay, so there you go, friends. I hope this video inspires you to get a watercolor and get your journal and just play with colors and do the watercolor wash technique on your pages. And let me know in the comments if you've tried this, what kind of watercolor do you use, or how do you actually do it with watercolor on your journals. I would really love to know how you do it, so I would have an idea as well. Thank you